Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host and head witch, Miss Solaris BlueRaven, at the helm this evening. I want to give a shout-out to everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, producers, listeners, chat room, and thank everyone for tuning in tonight. And we are 100% listener-supported, so if you like what you're hearing, please click on the donate button. We appreciate your support, and thank you for any contribution you can make to this excellent station. And, of course, we have daylight savings time occurring at 2 a.m. on Sunday, I believe, so just a heads up for everybody to spring forward. And also a reminder, I am no longer accepting any calls or questions via email during the show. This might change from week to week, of course, as a reminder to you guys. So just another heads up right there. And you are listening to Studio A. And my special guest this evening is Joanne Richards. Joanne Richards is the Executive Director of Educational Nonprofit Earth Defense Headquarters. Her husband, Mark Richards, and his father, Ellis Loyd Richards, were involved with top-level military intelligence operations since World War II. Many of these operations included on-world and off-world contact and battles with various alien species. Mark's family history includes some very interesting bloodlines and personal connections. Both of his grandfathers worked with Nikola Tesla. Grandfather Richards worked on the Manhattan Project. Mark's father spent summers with Tesla, Goddard, and Hubble. Both he and Mark were involved with top-secret things since they were teens, and it runs in the family. And Joanne has been a guest on several radio and TV shows, including The Fenton Perspective, Quantum Leap, Ohio Exopolitics, Through the Keyhole with Karyn Dolan, Rob Simone, Light of Day, Sedona Lights, Vortex Network News, Cosmic Connections, Out There TV, and is featured in Ed Grimsley's video. She has given presentations at Probe UK conferences in October 2007 and 2011, at Ed Grimsley's Skywatch conference in May 2009, Philadelphia in April 2010, the 2012 Summit in May 2012, the 2012 Super Soldier Summit in June 2012, the Norcal MUFON BBQ in July of 2012, and the Alchemy Event in November 2012, and she was interviewed by Project Camelot in June of 2012. Very, very busy. Joanne speaks about her knowledge of military operations and meetings that these men were involved with. She shares information about numerous alien species, the secret space fleet, and battles with aliens on and off-world. In 1984, Mark was falsely convicted of a murder and has been incarcerated ever since. The family now believes it was to keep him quiet about what he knows and to keep him from fighting the New World Order. Joanne has an incredible story to tell about human ET contact, and for that information, please visit her website at www.edhca.org, and that I have posted in the chat room. And please welcome Joanne to the show this evening. Joanne, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to hear your voice, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Of course.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. It's great. And you've been a busy lady.
Yes, and that didn't even include all the speaking engagements I had last year.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I was going to say, that's a mouthful.
Yes.
That's great. So I'm glad you're out there communicating this information, which is desperately needed right now. I mean, there's just so much going on. And I wanted to get started a little bit and basically ask you how you got involved in your husband's events and covert experiences. Obviously, you were married to him, but how did you get pulled into all this information?
Well, let's see. We met in 1997, and I was doing some research for him for what I thought was the family history, because everything he writes is part of this huge encyclopedia of family history. Little did I know that this UFO stuff was part of his family history. And after a few years of just researching for him, and I was doing a little newspaper and stuff, he started, it's like, why don't you go to this UFO conference? Like, okay. And I kind of knew by then that he'd had some involvement. The next year, and he'd been slowly giving me some of his written reports. And then by the next year, I had my booth for the first time at the Bay Area UFO Expo in Santa Clara. So that was like 2005. And then as he writes more and more, I just keep getting more and more reports. And now I know when I'm doing research for him, I see that eventually it shows up in the reports that he writes. Like, oh, I sent you that information. Or, and some of it, what I do is background information, like biographies of people involved, certain dates, because maybe he remembers what happened, but not necessarily specific dates for background info that he's trying to fill in. Not necessarily gaps, because he remembers things perfectly, but like the other things that were happening in politics and the military that were happening like around the same time. So it just kind of fills in, it rounds out all the information. So I do that for him, and some of his kids send in stuff and other friends. So there's several of us, like as his background researchers, so I've just been doing, booths and talking for several years now, and I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you're doing this work. And yeah, you're like his record keeper, aren't you?
Right.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's very, very important, especially if he's having, well, I don't know if he's having missing time, or I suspect he might, but it's good to have this documented, as we all know, because over the years things get kind of faded into another realm, so to speak. I mean, at least it does with me. So I'm really glad I've written when I did on the benchmark of when I did on that timeline. So I suspect that's something that you're doing, and really appreciative of you doing that. And insofar as his father goes, what was his function in the military, and also what projects was he involved with? How much can you talk about that? And insofar as, like, say, the Manhattan Project and things like this.
Well, his grandfather Richards was involved with the Manhattan Project, and that's about all I know. But his grandfather Richards was a brilliant electronics engineer. And he ran something called the Coin Electrical Institute in, I think it was Illinois. And Mark's dad went to that as well. His dad has a couple of different degrees, like in business and also in law. His dad went into the Army Air Corps when we were in World War II, and he was flying. We didn't have jets yet, so he was flying like P-38s and P-51s and whatever the Air Force had at the time. Then it became the actual Air Force. But as soon as he was done with World War II, he was being like stationed all these places that now it turns out we find out that had UFO involvement or UFO activity there. And he was a licensed, he had a law degree and was a JAG officer, so he had the authority to go investigate UFO sightings and interview people. And then part of his job was to deal with the UFO stuff. Part of his job was to, get people to think they were crazy or put out misinformation because, of course, you couldn't tell the public what was really happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and so his dad was all over the world. His dad was off-world. There was a time when Mark was 5 or 6 when his dad was gone for 18 months, and only 6 months of that was he stationed at some top-secret base in Pakistan. The rest of it, he was off-world doing who knows what. But I've seen his military orders, and they all say top secret and confidential.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, wow. And Mark is basically the same. I haven't seen all of Mark's orders, but I have copies of a few of his military orders, and pretty much most of them are for top secret things. And they were both involved even when they were teenagers. So, Mark was doing stuff with the Navy when he was not even out of high school.
It almost sounds like he was pre-selected.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And he's so smart that he was actually working on projects at Lockheed for Skunk Works and whatever, because they would have a flaw in his top secret submarine, and he'd go, fix it or see what the design flaw was and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very genius oriented. And what was the connection with Tesla?
Oh, both of Mark's grandfathers worked with Tesla on various projects. And I don't know exactly what the projects were, but I know his mother's dad worked with Tesla. The Tesla was designing some kind of engine that was actually used in an airship in the late 1800s. And Grandpa Taylor got to be on the test flight of the airship. And fortunately, he got off before it crashed in the Midwest. But so he was doing certain things, and I don't know what Grandfather Richards was doing with Tesla. I know that Mark's dad, when he would spend summers there, he got to test different things, including, I think, the death ray, and other things that Tesla was working on. So,
wow, that's fascinating. When
Tesla knew he was going to be killed soon, he had Mark's dad and Mark's grandpa come to the famous hotel where he was, take a lot of his secret notebooks and stuff, so they became the guardians of a lot of his secret notes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where they are to this day, but they're still under the guard of somebody in the family.
So basically, in a good place, opposed to some other agency, perhaps. Yeah.
I have no idea where they are, but it kind of got passed down in the family. So Mark would have ended up as a guardian. So I don't know where he has them, and that's what keeps me alive, not knowing half this stuff.
Right, I would imagine so. And I would suspect also over the years, have you had a lot of hassle? I mean, have you been threatened a lot considering the background you come from with Mark and everything?
Well, what's interesting is before I even knew about the UFO stuff, and I was just, running around the county looking at interesting things that he wanted me to go see if this is still there or whatever. And maybe, I drive up to the thing and there was these two guys hanging out, saying, "Oh, we're just waiting for somebody." It's like, because then I started driving around in a different part, in not far from there, and there they were. Oh, look, there they are again. And I've shown up places. I was doing some film work for a documentary I filmed, and was out at a former air base that now has an air museum, for example. And I'm walking around, and I'm walking back to this one thing and waiting for the person who was helping me, and then this very German-looking guy, I think he was German, but this nice-looking blonde guy was just kind of standing there. "Oh, I just came over to the States to see my brother, and I like to go around to air museums." Like, And so those weren't threatening, but just odd. And then nobody usually verbally hassles me, no. I have been places where, yes, I see people out of place, and I've been in England speaking and then go to be a kind of a tourist in England, and first time I was there, this one guy was at like a palace I was at, and then he was at a totally different kind of place I was at out in the middle of nowhere, a circle of standing stones. It's like, oh, what's the odds that you would have been at the Blenheim Palace and now you're at this thing? And I've been at another air museum where a guy just showed, "Oh, I used to be stationed." It's like, Now, the time I spoke in Philadelphia, I gave like 7 talks in 9 hours, and towards either right before the last talk or the next to the last talk, all of a sudden, something kind of zapped me because I felt sick, my back hurt, my head hurt. It's like, no, I'm giving this last talk or two because these are the really juicy ones that people have been waiting all day for. So, but mostly nobody usually threatens me. When I go to England, there's usually somebody from Interpol checking me out. So,
well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that at least. They always know where I am, and they always know when I'm going to, especially these foreign conferences. They always show up to check on me. So. Right. Yeah, they shadow you. Well, that's pretty typical. That's pretty standard. I think those of us who get pulled into these programs tend to be immune to that after a while. At least that's the way I look at it. I'm just calibrated for a lot of things anyway. But
right.
Insofar as this, go ahead.
I've never really felt in danger. Because I just have whatever you want to call them. I have protection around me, so that's nice.
Yeah, I get that too with you. I totally. You have a really nice vibration. I noticed that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And also, when it comes down to the operations he was involved with in this battle, the extraterrestrial battle, I was wondering if you could kind of go into a little bit of that. I was curious as far as what year that took place and what exactly happened.
Mark? Okay. I only know of a few of them, and like I say on pretty much every show or interview that I do, is he can only tell me, he doesn't ever tell me anything that he's bound by his U.S. secrecy oaths, because he won't break that. He's honorable. He won't break that, and thrown in federal prison. So, I don't know any of that stuff. But he did stuff under international agencies and other agencies, and there's plenty that he can tell me. Or he can maybe tell me something his dad did, his dad's dead, certain things he can tell me. Anyway, I know there was a couple of space battles, 3 in particular, that he was involved with in the 70s. The first one was in 1976. There was, and it was 2-part. There was a group of reptilians down in the Antarctic working with the Nazis to develop a tectonic weapon, and their plan was to set off a string of massive earthquakes around the world and destroy certain civilizations, and then they would start taking over. And Mark's dad was in charge of the group that went down to deal with that. At the same time, there were 2-dimensional gates or portals that opened up in the sky over China, and there was an invasion fleet coming through those gates, and it's right at the same time, right at the same time, right after this happened, right all at the same time, there was a massive earthquake in China, Tangshan, China. This is July of 76, and that's documented on the internet. And lots of people were scooped up, and they were waiting in ships ready to be taken back out to space. Mark was in charge of the air battle over China to fight back this invasion fleet. and he, in his alien craft, and that's another part of the story, and one of his raptor friends who was in his craft, they each went through a dimensional portal and imploded them with an antimatter bomb, or whatever you want to call it, weapon, and they went out to space through a wormhole and did what they did, and then came back and helped Mark's dad. That was 1976. The very next year, in 1977, there was another invasion fleet coming from, far out in space. And I know it was a certain faction of raptors and this insect thing called trogs, and I don't know what other species might have been involved. We, at the time, had a base on the moon, and the base was attacked, and the men were killed with they were attacked with neutron bombs, and died of neutron radiation. So that destroyed our base. We were trying to put up this really cool telescope to see even farther out in space than we could see at that time. And so the intelligence, that they knew they knew this fleet was coming in, and what a lot of people know now, because I and other people have talked about this, is we had a secret space fleet, and that fleet, and the help of the Nazis who we were fighting the year before, because now they've become our allies, and Oceanics came up out of the ocean in their spacecraft, and we had a lot of help, and we fought back that invasion fleet, because in 1977, if we hadn't, things would be a whole lot different now.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and then,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, keep going.
1979, and I don't know, I'm sure there was stuff that happened between 77 and 70. Well, there was something, but that was in a space battle. But anyway, in 1979, in August, Mark gets called up by his dad and says, we ought to go. And there was supposed to be some kind of alien conference out by the asteroid Vesta and the other asteroids that are right out there. And that happened to be a base for some of the Nordic human-like, the Aryan human-looking species. And anyway, there's going to be this conference that I don't know much about, but our space fleet was going to go out there and kind of hang out and monitor and whatever. And on the way, the good part is Mark had a first contact with this really cool cat species, but there was, I think the trogs again, the insect guys, ambushed the Nordic base, and then there was this space battle. Now, this is the first space UFO report of Mark's that I ever read. And fortunately, it's like the shortest one he's ever written, because everything since then has been thousands of pages. But it's like, okay, this is pretty intense. I'm hearing about cats, which sound cool. I'm hearing about these raptor things, which take people as pets and eat them if they want. And then I'm reading about my husband in this space battle, and he almost dies. It's like, but we were victorious. His wounds healed. He came back. And, a month or so later, then the dual fate thing happened that he was involved with. So and I'm sure he's been involved with more than those 3 space battles. Those are the 3 main ones that I know about.
Those are wild. And it's, for people who have never been exposed to this sort of thing, I know it sounds really out there, but I tell you, the more I do research and the more I confirm data across for my own research, it's just amazing to me that there is so much that's been unseen and censored that people have no clue what's really gone on. I mean, and it's just amazing to me. And also with these, you said the raptors. Now, which ones are the good reptilians? Is it the raptors?
Well, I'd like to say yes.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, and again, just like people, you're going to have good and bad in every alien species, because not all raptors are our friends, and not all reptoids are our enemies. But just because I talk a lot about reptilians, for example, I was just explaining this to a guy in Ireland today. The raptors are descendants of the velociraptor-type dinosaurs. They're from Earth. They've been here for millions of years. The ones that were the ones that Mark is best friends with, basically, their ancestral land was the UK. It's no wonder I love to go visit there, I guess. But there are only 20 genetic markers from us, so that's really cool. Millions of years ago, they tend to steal technology. So millions of years ago, they'd stolen somebody's spacecraft that either landed here or whatever. They went out to space to colonize space. So that's what they've been doing for all these years. They've got several planets out there, and they've got a whole empire out in space.
Wow.
65 million years ago, there was a huge asteroid that hit, I believe, the Yucatan Peninsula, pretty much destroyed everything. The survivors of their species, some went underground here on Earth, some were on their base on Mars, some were on their base on the Moon. And so the survivors evolved into the bipedal, more human-looking, no-tail type reptilian who are also originated on Earth. We call them the reptoids. They remind me the most of the reptilian creature that was on the TV show, Pretty Anna, who basically, wanted everybody to think they were friends, and they really just wanted to come invade. Those are the reptoids. Now, I'm sure there are some nice ones, but typically they are working with the New World Order. They are responsible for lots of kidnappings and maybe mass abductions. They are responsible for a lot of terrorist-type activities. We might think it's a human terrorist, but it's not necessarily so. They're just generally not our friends.
Wow.
Then there are other reptilians, for example, who are from space, and I don't really know much about them except for the Dracos, who I guess are not friendly, but they're the winged ones, and they're pretty tall. And then there must be some other friendly reptilians out there because we see, Misha Johnston, another gal that was at the Super Soldier Summit, she knows people who had positive experiences, and I'm all for that. But, Mark's had some really positive experiences with his raptor friends. And just this past October when I was in England, I was talking about his friend Naga, who used to rent castles in Scotland for vacation and have other alien friends come, and, they'd spend winters in Scotland having a great time.
Right.
So on one hand, they're fabulous warriors, and on the next hand, they're very strong family-oriented beings, and they're very smart and have great spiritual belief systems, and so there's just, there's a lot of really cool stuff to learn about these different species.
Well, I think so, too. And the one thing, there's a thread in the fabric, because it seems to me like all of these species, whether they're hostile or not, eventually learn to ascend in consciousness. That's my take anyway. Just like anything. It evolves, it grows, and it learns how to ascend. And I'm also wondering how much of it has been modified with a different form of DNA to a point where they are ascending. But, yeah, not to say that they're all good, but I do know people who have interaction with, quote-unquote, reptilians, and it's positive. So I can't say that they're all negative either. From what I've heard through the, different people and resources and things like that. So, yeah, it's very interesting, and I'm really glad that you've taken the time to put all this together and archive his information, because I find it to be very, very fascinating. Now, do you get visitation, like insofar as extraterrestrials go?
No. Well, I don't know.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. I would say no. I've never, if I was, I didn't know that that's who they were. Now, that's not to say, Mark has implied that maybe there were some human type, human looking, but they were really aliens that might have come to some of these conferences. I wouldn't have known because, when you're a speaker, that's where your mind is. You're thinking about your talk, and you're thinking about your booth, and you're thinking about, okay, I want to meet as many people as I can. I wasn't looking at the people in the audience thinking, okay, which one of these is really an alien? And walked up to me and said, oh, by the way, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so. I thought that would be cool. But the other thing for people to remember is that there are treaties in place that ban open contact. So it would be unlawful for an alien species to walk up to me at a conference and say, hi, I'm so-and-so from the asteroid Vesta. Husband wanted us to meet. They can't legally do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what happens if they're hybrids? Then wouldn't the treaty be broken because they're automatically hybrids? I sense that there are a lot of people on this planet that are. And I'm wondering if those treaties are kind of like null and void at this point because their ancestors are from these different star systems. What do you think?
The starseed thing, I wouldn't necessarily say, and I'm not an expert on this because I don't know for sure. It's like, I don't know that same treaty applies because if they're a hybrid, and they're, I know a few people who are definitely hybrids or they are starseeds, and, I totally believe that they've come here to taken on human form because they have a purpose here. I'm not talking about starseeds and hybrids. I'm talking about full-blown aliens from other planets or from the ocean or whatever, that are definitely 100% not human, not hybrids, and they're banned by treaties not to interact with us. But that doesn't mean the civilians. Okay, let me clarify that. Civilians, they do interact with the military and the governments. Because my husband went to his first interstellar treaty conference as a 7-year-old with his dad and saw hundreds of species at a place in England. They were holding different parts of this conference in different parts of southern England, and I went to visit several of those places last fall when I was there. And it's really interesting to go to a place and say, oh, this is where he met Naga and his kids. Oh, this is where the opening ceremonies of this huge conference was, in this big cathedral or this abbey. And can you just imagine all these hundreds of aliens walking in here, and government officials as well? It's really hard to get your head around that, but it's really interesting, and I love that. I know that part of history that a lot of people don't know, so now I can share it. But since that 1961 treaty, open communications with civilians was banned for 50 years. That treaty ended in 2011, and then after the royal wedding, there was another interstellar treaty conference, and there had been others between those two conferences, and so they put that ban in place. So there's another 25-year ban on open communication with civilians and aliens.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. So what happens? What's the real agenda then, insofar as the people who have access to these extraterrestrials? What are they really trying to accomplish on Earth? What is your impression?
It depends on the species. Several want to come here for science and just examine things and study us. Some want to come here just like Star Trek. They want to come here like a vacation, and it's a park planet, and it's beautiful. Some want access to our natural resources, which include humans, and that's not always a good thing. Usually not. Some believe rightfully so that this is their home world, and that's not to say that they're intending to invade. This is their home world, and they don't want to see it ruined, and we've done a pretty good job of messing it up.
True enough. Yeah.
Some want to scoop us up and take us out to space for meat and breeding programs and for just sex slaves. Come here as merchants. I know this, well, I don't know them, but I have learned about this wonderfully sounding dog species who has the largest base on Earth in Australia, and they are simply merchants. They, I'm assuming, buy things and then export them, like the aliens like chocolate, aliens like Rolex watches, aliens like bling, aliens like things we have here, and they're like pretty things, lots of them. They have the form probably to wear them or use them, and this dog species, they're exporters out into space. There are other species who come here as scientists and archaeologists and anthropologists. There's another wonderful cat species who comes here to, look for evidence of maybe their species having been here before. And they're very peaceful unless they're attacked. But that's, their agenda is not to come here and take over. They just want it. Well, where has our species, visited? What part of Earth? Right.
Yeah. What about terraforming? Or is there any race that's trying to terraform the Earth?
Earth? That might be part of global warming, but again, I'm not an expert on that. I just know that global warming is happening. I know there's alien species who have terraformed other planets out in space so that it's more like what they're used to. The raptors have terraformed several planets out in space, so it's more suitable for what they like.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know of any species per se that is purposefully terraforming our planet.
Okay. And you mentioned something earlier that you said the Nazis kind of helped out in a positive way. Is that correct? With one of the battles?
Well, in 1977, because the year before, they were working with some negative raptors who were like cousins or some kind of distant relative from the faction that we're good friends with. And we, meaning my husband, not because I haven't met them, but anyway, so when Mark's dad and his troops got down to the Antarctic and were fighting this group of Nazis and raptors, well, the Nazis realized that the raptors really weren't their friends, and they ended up helping the human troops. So then for a time, at least for a while, they were kind of our allies, so that the next year when we had this space invasion coming, they worked with us to fight off the alien invaders. So, yeah, but these are take a shoot, whatever. The Nazis that left Germany after the war, or as the war was ending, however the history goes, established this base in the Antarctic, and I imagine it's still there. But I don't have any proof of that. But I can't imagine they just all died off, because it was a pretty impressive sounding base. They had their own they had a whole breeding program going on with humans, because they were trying to develop what the Nazis wanted, the Aryan race. And it's because there's an Aryan alien species called Aryans, spelled exactly the same way. And they're very blonde.
I wonder how much of that is engineering. But yeah, I mean, after where I've been with the psychotronics and the synthetic telepathy and all the stuff that I know is real, I'm very clear that they've been modifying quote-unquote humans to appear as quote-unquote extraterrestrials if they want them to be. So I find that interesting. And also, I think Antarctica, I think you're right on that. I've been doing more and more research on that, and obviously there's some kind of a base still there. There's some kind of a remain still there. But what I was thinking was that maybe they were teleporting or actually transferring from that location to an off-planet area. I don't know what your impression is of that.
Oh, I don't know. I'll have to ask the captain.
Okay, ask him if you can and get back with me, because that's my impression. I've asked other people, and they just say, oh, no, I don't think so, But I just get that feeling that I think it's more than that, especially with the technology they've been working with for so long. So.
Oh, yeah. And what was fascinating, because in 1978, there was a huge UFO that crashed in Bolivia. And at the time, if you've ever heard of Operation Moondust, that was the military branch or arm or whatever group that their specific charge was to go retrieve, investigate downed spacecraft, downed debris, whatever. And in the later 70s, Mark was in charge of that. So there was this UFO that crashed in Bolivia, and it was a little insect species of delightful little beetles that had been tricked into thinking that Earth was uninhabited, and their world was, destroyed or being destroyed, or was dying out or whatever. And they came here thinking, nobody lives here. We're going to go there. That's going to be our new world. And I think there was probably some space battle going on, before they landed or crashed, and so it's probably why they crashed. They also were supposed to set off some, what do we call them? Time-disrupting probe things, which our intelligence found out about. So it was all thwarted, but had they been successful, it would have disrupted timelines, and there would have been no American Revolution or French Revolution. So things would have been very different. But out comes this little lovely bug, this cute little beetle guy, very friendly, but they have cloaking technology, they have interdimensional travel technology, and Mark he came across like a scout group when he got to Bolivia, and he could talk to them telepathically, and he could see them even though they were cloaked, because he has that ability. And so they became buddies, and they protected him, and they protected the humans, and were fighting. I just can't imagine these little bugs in their little, like 3 or 4 of them might be in a little, some kind of container. It's not actually a ship, but some kind of, protective thing. And then they actually had, even for their size, they had like energy weapons and everything. They were pretty powerful, very protective. And then, they would play with Mark's kids, but they were also very protective. So, and they, the humans, our military helped them establish a base here or two. They've got a couple bases here on Earth. You know, they're like 6 billion strong or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they're really tiny. So
wow.
we don't see them.
It's quite amazing insofar as how many species are actually here simultaneously. And when you said Mark, now is he naturally telepathic, or is that something that was enhanced in him through the operation program?
I want to think now. I fully believe Mark has very unique or very wonderful natural abilities, because he's had these ever since he was a little kid. Mm-hmm. You know, he can speak telepathically to other species. He can speak telepathically to elementals or the fairy realm, and because it's part of his bloodline, and he has very Celtic bloodlines mm-hmm. side of his family, so he comes by this naturally. I don't know exactly what training he has in the military. He also has some very unique, elite military training. Not enhanced. I'm not saying he has no enhancements, but I don't think that's the norm for him. I just think he has some really good training to be a really good soldier and a really good commander. Mm-hmm. These super soldiers, you know, he's not that kind of super soldier. He's a super soldier because of his elite training. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say, let's talk about the bloodlines a little bit. So he is Celtic, and are you Celtic also?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that comes on my mother's side too. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about that. So what exactly are they looking at with the bloodlines?
His dad's side is straight from Germany, and they were a German princedom, or whatever you call it. I mean, 4 generations back, if Mark's family had stayed in Germany, he would be a German prince from the Rhineland. So he's tied to the House of Nassau and the House of Orange. A lot of his distant cousins are European royalty. He's also related on his one of his grandmother's side, like his dad's mom's, like to the Stuarts of Scotland, the Stuart line and Peacock line, and he's related to Williams, the guy who was like the governor of Rhode Island, and some pretty influential people like in Indiana and Illinois and that part of the United States. So his one grandfather was the electronics genius that I said. His other grandfather was very politically connected and was a Teddy Roosevelt Rough Rider, and he was like one of the first MIB Secret Service type guys. And I have his saddle sitting up in my living room. And he was going to be governor of, I think, I get Indiana and Illinois mixed up, so one of those I states, and he was murdered because they didn't want him being governor, whoever they is. But, you know.
And that's another thing. Everybody's always wondering who they are, but I suspect they are just the this organization of a certain bloodline group of people that have been really trying to call the shots. Is that what your impression is, or what's your take?
Yeah, you know, I'm sure there's been these shadow government type people or the rich and powerful that really run the show. They've been around for a long time.
Yep.
However long that is, they've been around. It didn't just start, in the 70s.
I agree.
So
yeah, I think this goes way, way back. And insofar as all these operations that your husband went on, and also his family, his grandfather, is there anybody alive today that's coming forward and kind of paralleling the information at all?
Not from his, well, what can I say? Not from his family, because his dad's dead. He has no brothers and sisters. His mother's gone. His friends growing up here never knew this side of him. His former wife never knew that when her husband said he was going to Canada to build a house, he was actually going off to do something for the military. The poor thing. And so none of his immediate friends here that he grew up with, grade school, college, they didn't know that side of him at all. And most of them I've never told because, it's kind of a need-to-know thing, and it probably will rock their world if they find that out. And they're not really into this kind of stuff, so they would probably never have the occasion to hear me know that I'm even doing a radio interview.
Well, it's so hard to digest for regular Joes. I mean, regular people, it's just like, you know. I mean, you have to really start investigating this information, but it does all add up. I mean, everything starts to parallel once you start really looking into it, as strange as it all may appear. So, yeah.
And the other women in his life and his children, a lot of them were around this and seeing him come and go in spaceships and seeing him, you know, work with different aliens and this and that. But the other thing is, as I've been doing this research and speaking out, then it motivates other people who are interested in what I'm saying to do further research on their own. And especially this one guy, I don't want to say he's my protege, but this one really good supporter. He listens to a lot of interviews and does a lot of research on his own, and he has found supporting evidence or other people talking about, oh, that person's talking about a dimensional gate in Iran. It's like, okay, well, good, because I was talking about it not a couple years ago, but a couple years before most people have, that you hear people talking about it. Cool, I'm not the only one saying this. Thank you very much. And so other people that have listened to me have then heard other people bring up things that validate what I've said, which is really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like speaking another language, and once you learn how to communicate in that language, it's people start understanding, and they start with the patterns, and all the patterns fall into place. From what I've seen, anyway. But insofar as these reptiles go, do they still interact in the Black Space Program? Apparently, they do, right?
I would say that I'm fairly confident that Prince Naga is probably still working on occasion with our military, yes.
Mm-hmm. And how long do they live?
He's probably well over 100 years old by now. There's a quote, and I was going to try and pull it up for tonight, but I didn't. Oh, maybe I'm looking. Oh, this is so funny. I'm looking right at it, and I didn't even know I had it here. Hopefully we'll have time to say it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, in 1971, there was another interstellar treaty conference in Iran, and Mark was there. Well, 10 years later, he would have been 18 or 19. He was on a break from the Vietnam War, and he went to the conference as a military person, but one of the speakers was a 300-year-old Raptor senator, who I have the most wonderful quote, and I love sharing it. But so they definitely can live hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I suspect we would be able to live longer, too, if we weren't so contaminated from day to day by so many different things. That's my take, anyway. But,
right.
Yeah. I think, do they ever talk about the evolution of mankind insofar as what we're capable of doing and what we're not doing? Do they ever address that at all, or no?
I know especially the raptors and even the elementals who live for hundreds of years are very disgusted with us for polluting the earth. So just like in witchcraft, for example, you honor the earth and you honor, nature, and you try and, take care of the earth and nature, and you do whatever you can to be a good steward of the earth.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Very true. And what happened to these Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what happened to these off-world races? Did I interrupt you? I want to make sure you finish if you needed to.
I was just going to say, the Raptors, for example, they don't use like our types of technology for building, and they will build a structure very slowly, and it's always very environmentally sound. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they don't have machinery that will do underground tunneling, whatever. But and of course, they're reptiles. They don't necessarily want to live in a concrete or wood building. They're like a jungly, sometimes the insides of their spaceships have had like a whole jungle section because that's what they're used to. They liked it when Earth was warmer and jungle-like. Mm-hmm. But they also don't seem to have a problem vacationing in the winter in Scotland and England. So I don't know if that's what's helped kept them alive longer. I don't know if it's just their lifestyle or just, I'm not really sure. They really haven't talked about, to me, obviously not to me, but Mark hasn't really gone into what their thoughts are on mankind evolving. They're not happy that because maybe they remember us as, they fondly, they call us rodents. They call us hairless apes. We're not very high on their priority chain, and we're certainly, except for eating us, we're not really high on their food chain. It's like, we're just nothing to them. And in 1961, so this will help kind of answer your question. In 1961, most of the sentient species, and this is a conference of sentient species, in whatever form you are, because some of them were gaseous and some were just, insects and things, but they were thinking and intelligent creatures. Their civilizations are all so much older than ours, and so it's like these things haven't been around very long, and how could they be sentient? It's like, why are we taking the time of day even talking to them or making treaties with them, or it's like, why should we let them go out into space? Right. So most of them don't think very highly of us.
Mm-hmm. I see that too, and what I also see is that these people in the illusion of control, like these corporations which call themselves government across the globe, seem to have that parallel. Though they treat people the same way that you're communicating these off-world species treat, quote unquote, whatever you want to call the people on this planet, because there's so many different races here already. But does that ring true to you at all?
I like that. Yeah, because the government doesn't really care about us.
Well, what race are they? That's my question. Because it almost sounds...
Because, like I said, reptoids, for example, and it depends, because, different species are working with different groups. Mm-hmm. The reptoids are notorious for working with different New World Order groups. Now, for example, in the report that Mark wrote about the 78 Bolivia thing, and if you haven't read any of my husband's reports, one thing people need to know is they're really long, they're really good. He, besides the meaty adventure part of any story, even though it's true, he also includes a lot of history and a lot of science, so that you know the full rounded picture of, what space is like, what's happening in space, what's the science behind it, what's the physics, and then who are all these players, be they government or political or just corporate people. So like in the 1978 report, he was going into, okay, here's Rupert Murdoch meeting with so-and-so, and they're going to have a meeting with this little group of aliens. It's like, oh! And he really named names. It's like you really got the picture of who was New World Order type people or who was working behind the scenes with different negative aliens. Like, oh my gosh. And Mark's just naming names right and left. It's like, oh, not good.
No, but he's able to do this. Now, that's another thing if we want to talk about his incarceration insofar as what exactly happened that set him up, and why didn't they just go ahead and just take him out if he was a threat? I mean, why the imprisonment instead of just eliminating him? What is your impression of that?
Especially because we're probably pissing them off a lot now. But
you think?
Yeah, I pride myself in this fact. Mark is a wonderfully honorable, talented, brilliant military officer. On the other hand, he loves to call himself a rogue. So if somebody gives him an order that he thinks is totally screwy or totally wrong or is going to put his people in harm's way, or there's a better way to do it, he's going to do that. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't always make friends with everybody. The other thing is, he was not going to play ball with New World Order people. Dad.
Okay, and Joanne, we're going to head for a break real quick. We'll be right back, everybody. Ravenstar's Witching Hour. Stay tuned.